Good morning again to everybody. Turns out that the reason my camera wasn't working before is that I hadn't turned it off in Doxy where I was doing the Dysons. I just shifted over, and therefore camera did not shift with me. Um, anyway, so here, spilled coffee, cleaned up, camera working, and when you're young and you spill coffee, you think, oh crap, I spilled coffee. When you're old and spill coffee, you think, oh my God, I'm falling apart. This is the end, right? I mean, it's like, so got past that though. Anyway, so my talk this morning is liable to be even more disjointed than usual. I've had a lot sort of floating around in my mind of late, and I'm going to share some of it, and I'm hopeful that I'm going to hear your thoughts and observations as well. Because what's interested me of late is the possibility of relationship or non-relationship between some of the ideas of quantum physics and Zen Buddhism. Now, that said, there's a perfectly valid reason why my degrees are in philosophy and counseling psychology and not physics and mathematics. So I wouldn't even say I have a rudimentary understanding of the concepts of physics. And in fact, look, so this is so crazy. I got to read you guys this because when I was looking this up, it's like, okay, so the questioner is asking, what is the superposition theory for dummies? Okay, I thought, oh, I hit on that one. Okay, for dummies. So here's the superposition theory for dummies. The superposition theorem states the following. In any linear and bilateral network or circuit having multiple independent sources, the response of an element will be equal to the algebraic sum of one of the responses of that element by considering one source at a time. Now, if that wasn't immediately clear to you, then you are sub-dummies, as am I, because I have no idea what that thing just said. Maybe Gary understands. He's Deborah understands. Oh my God. Well, anyway, it's way beyond me. So I kind of have this a sort of rudimentary, ignorant way in which I formulate these things that somehow make sense to me. And not that. But one of the things that I was, there are many people these days that are sort of equating quantum physics with the Dharma. And at least as I've looked at it thus far, there are resemblances and it's not the same. Okay. But I could be completely FOS. And so those of you that know better than me, feel free to chime in as we get into this. But the example that came up in the video I was watching last night was relative to quantum entanglement. And the way that I understand quantum entanglement, again, may or may not, if two particles are in proximity, they can fall into coherence. The electrons are rotating in the same direction at the same speed and various other, whatever it is that constitutes coherence. And then you can then separate those particles by thousands of miles. You could take one of them to Australia, and that coherence would continue, that they'd continue to rotate in the same way at the same speed, and so on. So that See, now I got Gary scratching his head. He's like, "Oh my God, what's he saying?" All right. But anyway, that's how I understand it. There's some resonance, synchronicity, coherence establishes between the two particles that is not dependent on geography, that they can be as far apart as possible. So what this person who was speaking last night was saying is that there are, well, many entanglements, perhaps infinite entanglements, and so therefore everything is interconnected. And while all of that may or may be true, it's not what we're talking about when we're talking about the Dharma, when we're talking about the one body, when we're talking about intimacy. So I think that they went too far in constructing that argument, because in the Dharma, in the one body, there are no two separate things inherently. It's not about uniting them and establishing coherence. In fact, coherence isn't even part of the idea of the question, right? It doesn't matter in a certain sense whether the molecules, atoms, whatever subatomic particles are in our toes are moving coherently with the molecules on the crown of our head. Has the body is the body, it is fully and intimately connected and has nothing to do with states of coherence or certainly where it is and where it is similar is the geography is not a factor. This is one body. Everything is intimately interconnected. Now, again, the distinction between that and the quantum entanglement may be subtle, but to me, it's necessary. It's essentially relevant. That they resemble one another. They are not the same thing as one another. And so, therefore, I think we need to be cautious drawing inferences from physics to explain Buddhist concepts. Because if people have not experienced the one body and had that direct experience, that direct encounter, then they're operating on a theoretical level, tying together two theoretical constructs and not dealing with the essential reality that cannot be reduced to constructs. Some of you had koans like that today, right? As soon as we try to create a construct, we've lost it. As soon as we try to reduce the Dharma to an idea, it's no longer the Dharma. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, as Lao Tzu said, right? The concepts must fail. All descriptions must fail. And yet we persist. And I don't know, probably hundreds, if not thousands of books have been written attempting to explain these things, attempting to relate these things to our intellects in a way that our intellects can grasp them and understand them. And as I've said before, no discredit to any of the authors, but all of them fail. all of them fail. We cannot put the Dharma in words. The only way to truly know the Dharma is to experience the Dharma. And then it gets even more complex than that, because the whole idea of experience requires subject and object. Something and something that is the experiencer. And in the one body, there is no such distinction. Something that I haven't taught in this Wild Fox Sangha is the identity of relative and absolute, the Sandokai. And I'd like to do that. I am going to in the near future. Deborah Kelly, do you have that in your files?
I'm not sure. Probably yes, I do because I have the service book and it's in there.
I think you sent me the service book at one time, didn't
I
you?
think so. Yeah, a PDF probably.
Okay. Unfortunately, I haven't paid Acrobat money. I resent paying them money every month, and so it may not be able to open a PDF. We'll see.
Do you want me to try to send you just that?
Yes. Is there any chance you convert it to a Word file?
I think it began as a Word file. I will
Oh,
investigate.
probably. Steph and Margaret wouldn't have had a PDF at the time they
No,
started that.
no, no, that was just the final step. I will look for it, Peter.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so once, when I have that, I just like that version. I looked around online to find a version that I liked equally well, and I could not find it. But it's a very, very important. It's actually it's a verse, it's a poem. And it's goes to a very essential point. Um, the identity of relative and absolute, and it's popped up in somebody's Dyson this morning. So yes, I'd love to have that if we can, and we will talk about it. So there are ways in which we can superficially understand the Dharma, but we can only really understand it through direct experience. Now, so I mentioned the quantum entanglement. So another thing that's gotten me interested of late, and this is not quantum physics, but it's intriguing. Do people know the work of Lynn McTaggart? John Scott told me the other day that he does. Um, so she's done work with intention. And she kind of, from what I've actually have her books on order, I'm going to read further into it. But she's done experiments to see whether intention in the human mind can affect things in the world. Um, and she starts out with it talking about a series of experiments that actually are not hers originally. They were originally done by the transcendental meditation folks. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi had people doing a whole series of experiments um, on the effects of human intent, focused intention, focused meditative attention. And so what he had done and what she replicated is taking, for example, germinating plants and having two sets, a control and the active set, and then having a group of people focus their intention on helping one set to grow and basically ignoring the other set or maybe not even being aware of its existence. And in the transcendental meditation experiments, the result was a dramatic difference that the plants that had people focusing on them grew significantly differently from the other plants. Now, a lot of that stuff, that they did a lot of stuff, and you may have heard of some of this. They went into war zones. I think it was in Lebanon, and actually tried to apply that principle to trying to stop violence. They did it. I think they did it in D.C. in this country too. And in both instances, the indicators that they measured, violent deaths and shooting and blah blah blah, all went down. And McTaggart reproduced that as well. But when we talk about something like wars, there's just far too many, there's infinite variables, really, and you can't control that at all. And so to say that the fact that you had, I don't know, 1,000 meditators for 8 days, and were able to reduce the level of violence, I think is a pretty far stretch. It's tantalizing, but I think it's a far stretch. Not as clear as the very concrete experiment with the little seedlings, where you get a dramatic improvement of growth over one set versus the other, and the variables are sort of far more controllable. But nevertheless, they've done that, and there seems to be evidence, very tantalizing evidence in my mind, that in fact human attention can affect, just the intention alone can affect outcomes in the world. Now, again, McTaggart takes it to a place that I think is far more questionable. So she does these huge lectures to or workshops to 700 people, and she has them all, focusing and doing meditation. And then over the course of the workshop, however many days it is, some people that have illnesses experience healing. Now, once again, that to me is suspect in a sense because there's far too many variables. And, it's not a controlled experiment. Did she have another group of 700 people that didn't do the meditation, and to see how, maybe 700 people, a certain number heal no matter what over the course of a week's time. You can't eliminate that. But again, I think it's intriguing. So how does that go back to Zen and superposition, which I explained very clearly a few minutes ago? And you may all want to look back at your notes if you didn't memorize that little thing. But I think that where we in Zen come closest to some of that, to start with, is with not knowing. I believe when we are not knowing, we are leaving the field open. In a sense, we're allowing superposition to maintain. It's once we have a concrete thought, a concrete direction, that things solidify. But so that not knowing allows all possibilities, right? In the quantum field, possibilities are infinite. It's not till the observer gets involved that things solidify and possibilities are narrowed down. But if the observer isn't doing that, then in theory things are all in constant flux. And they're waves, not particles, all kinds of weird stuff. But I'm thinking that that's closest to the state of not knowing. That not knowing allows all possibilities. Now, why do we care about that? Why would it be desirable to not know? In terms of this sort of pseudoscientific analysis, if you will. And the answer is, again, one of the things that these people, these scientists are saying is that our minds create outcomes in the world. And I'm not talking about physically, my mind says, I'm going to move that object from A to B, but that's simply through our awareness, through our intention, through our observation, we change the world. And certainly that is known in quantum physics, again, that simply the act of observation changes the wave into a particle, and so on. So that the mere presence of our awareness can transform things in our life, in our world. And they're relating this to energy fields. And what they're saying is that our energy field, and we have one, if our thoughts are very negative, if we are angry, if we are frustrated, if we are in any of those sort of negative states, that's what our energy field is projecting out into the world around us. If by the same token we're in a positive state of mind, that's what we're projecting out into the world. And that the fields that we interact with respond in kind. So we're having an effect on our lives just by our attitudes, by our thinking, and so on and so forth. But now this is obviously speculation to a large extent, and it may be an over up interpretation of the conclusions, that taking sort of things that function at the subatomic level and suggesting that that's how things are affected at the macro level. Oh, now I'm cracking them up. What am I saying? I don't know.
Well, I really agree with the last thing you said.
What's that?
I really agree with the last thing that you said.
Oh, okay. About overgeneralizing from subatomic to big things. Okay. But I guess I draw no solid conclusions out of any of this other than I find it intriguing. And I find it has parallels to Zen, and I don't think it is Zen.
The Dalai Lama wrote an interesting book called The Universe in a Single Atom, and it's exactly about this relationship. It's yeah, there are commonalities, but he would not call it Zen. I mean, yeah.
What does he know? How old is he now? He's about 90, early 90s.
He regularly attends conferences with scientists. He's a very curious person, and he's always looking for new ideas. And um, yeah, he's very old,
Yeah, he's
older than we are.
old. He's really old, not like us. Okay. So anyway, so yeah, well, and he also famously made a statement that I don't agree with. What he said is if science and the Dharma are in conflict, he would go with science. And
Oh, hmm.
and he is what you say, he's very intrigued by science. He interacts with a lot of the scientists, and he's kind of, kind of in that whole world of um particularly a lot of mindfulness folks are have interest in that area. But I disagree. I go back to the Buddha who said your experience is the ultimate arbiter, and therefore if I have a certain experience of the Dharma, and the scientist says, well, no, that's not what it is. I'm not going there. I don't agree with the Dalai Lama.
What I thought he said, and I just did a quick Google that it was about if science and religion conflict, not if science and the Dharma. I think I always thought he was talking about sort of the rigid, beliefs that religions often have about facts, and yeah, so I don't think he said that. I just looked it up. I found something where it's if science and religion conflict. Maybe I could have found something else if I spent more time. But anyway, so I think you may be misquoting him.
Um, I may be, and I may have, since he's a Buddhist and his religion is the Dharma, I probably equated religion with Dharma, not with the Christian, the Judeo-Christian Bible or something like that, you know. Um, so
But then we get into the whole conversation about Buddhist religion versus Dharma, and they're different as well. But
y
that's a whole nother,
yes,
that's
but
another
he is
wormhole.
but he is the head of the Tibetan religion, not a man on the street in Thailand. You know what I mean? He is a pretty authoritative voice when it comes to Dharma. And he certainly is one of the most deeply enlightened people alive today, if not the most. Um, and so I give his insight, I tend to give it great value.
But whether he's talking about religion, anyway, I'm just saying, I'm defending, I want the Dalai Lama to not be saying that science um, trumps Dharma. So I'm making an argument because it matters, but I don't know anything about what the context of Gary's quote and the context of what you're talking about. So I should, but that's why but I wanted to talk about the physics of tiny, tiny bit. So my experience of the physics is um, delicious and wonderful theories. But remember, for instance, our science of particle physics that goes into incredible detail and describes that we can find quarks, et cetera, is about smashing things against each other and measuring the detritus and calling that reality. And I think that's, to me, that's a very nice place to look to see what we're talking about with science. I love science, but remember, it's humans playing, and Gary and I have a little bit of a disagreement about this. So we don't want to go there either too much. But for me, it's magnificent tinker toys. And this entanglement thing is wonderful. And it gives a glimpse, and it's fascinating. I mean, with entanglement, you could talk about, if you start talking about quote unquote the Big Bang, which of course will be a theory modified over time as well. You can talk about how every single emanating distinct entity that we point to today is entangled, because if you want to talk about, laws of physics and conservations, everything, but these things are positing principles, to my experience, that humankind longs for particular ways of ordering our experience. So one of them will be conservation of this or conservation of that, and or how to reconcile how we've split things apart, like Hegelian theory of your philosophy. But yes, ultimately, these are just constructs. These are wonderful human constructs. But settling down to silence, we get to just be present. Different thing. So these are all emanations of our mind. They're great, but they're emanations of our mind. So is the world. Emanations of our mind and great. Or what do we call the world? So we won't go there either.
So, in physics, there are different fundamental viewpoints, and some people think that in physics we're trying to figure out what the underlying reality of everything is, and blah blah blah. And but some people in quantum physics think that, well, we've made some observations that give us certain rules that we allow us to predict things, and their view is that instead of that being a hint at what the underlying reality is, that's just it. All there are. I mean, that it sort of goes along with the Zen not knowing. We don't know. We can't conceptualize what is underneath the experimental results. We can draw rules from it that let us make predictions, but we can't actually conceptualize what they mean in some sense, because anything we conceptualize in terms of what they mean is just a projection of our mind.
Right.
So there's a school in physics that says just don't even try to do that. It's just wrong to try to do that. I think that's called the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, and that's what to me seems really aligned with Zen. We just see what we see in the world, and we can make predictions to some degree, but we don't actually know what's underneath it all, and there's no reason to think we can.
We're constructionists.
Yeah.
That's how we're built. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it's just.
What about thinking that reincarnation is our cremated ashes becoming part of all of the atoms that have always been here? It's just we create a new mixture of atoms. And so, we just become physically part of the one body.
Well, we're never not physically part of the one body, right? We believe we are in this separate integrated state. We never are. We never are. We're always part of it. And we are always all of it, right? I mean, that's the implication of the one body. There's nothing that we're not.
I always like that Audubon quote of when the bird and the book disagree, go with the bird.
Yeah, I like that. I like that as well. I want to just go back to that question that Deborah raised. I mean, the other thing that's going on right now is there's a lot of new understanding of consciousness and the relationship of consciousness to the universe. And again, the one body, the Dharma would say that there is no separate consciousness. We see it as separate. I see myself as Peter. I see myself as a separate individual, but that's illusory. Consciousness is unbounded and undifferentiated in its fundamental nature.
My son-in-law is writing a term paper on the consciousness of plants. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do. Well, I'm sort of, what is it called? Well, anyway, I think that it's a pan something theist, which is that I believe all things are conscious. I believe consciousness is a property of matter, not a property of the human brain, which we've thought about it for so long. And that seems to be emerging also, that and that in my mind is very consistent with the Dharma. Again, that the conscious frame is the one body, the entire thing. It's not humans or humans and dogs or whatever little subset we want to carve out. It's everywhere, everything. And then we carve it off. We create our separate identity, but that's not there. So I believe, and again, with a capital B on that word believe. I mean, I can't, I'm not a scientist, I can't prove it, but I believe that everything is conscious. The universe is conscious, and we create the distinctions.
Going along with the quantum physics stuff and consciousness, the guy Erwin Schrödinger was one of the greatest quantum physicists, and he wrote this little book, What is Life? And in this book, he talks about his intuition about consciousness is like, what you're saying, that it's just an attribute of the universe, of our universe, has this attribute of awareness. And our brains, it seems like it's all focused on our brains because we have all these thoughts and stuff in our brains that allow us to make concepts. And and the rest of the universe is not as complicated as that, and can't generate thoughts and stuff the same way. Um, but that it's nevertheless just a fundamental attribute of the universe, in Schrodinger's way of looking at it. So it's not just a weird religious Zen thing to think that way.
Thank you. That's an important distinction because what we say in Zen is that we are not we are not our thinking mind. We are not our thoughts. We tend to associate with our thoughts, but the fundamental consciousness is not thoughts. What we realize when we're talking about realization is what exists before thoughts. Thought is something that we add afterwards. It's not the basis of our awareness. So that's very consistent.
Gary, I think I heard you used the term consciousness and awareness as similar concepts. Would you agree with that? Or did I hear it the wrong way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I mean, there are people that think about this philosophically, I guess, and I don't. But I use them kind of the same way. But I think there are some people that have consciousness as something a little different and then somehow involving thought more. But I'm not an expert in that area.
Yeah. What do you think, Peter? I mean, consciousness and awareness.
Well, I think there is a distinction, okay, in the sense that awareness, we're starting to fall into subject and object. Consciousness has no subject and object, right? It's just, and then when I become aware, if I'm just this open field of consciousness and I become aware of myself, I become aware of you or whatever, now we have subject and object. So there's a bit of a subjective problem there, but that, could you have awareness without subject and object? I imagine you could, but more often than not, as soon as we become aware, we have created ourselves and we've created a world.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
And we spoke a second ago about how we're complicated because we have these thoughts. And I was thinking, what are we calling complicated? I mean, out the window, creation is bursting. So our thoughts to me feel more like noise than, I mean, it feels complicated, but it's not necessarily more.
It's less complicated
Yeah.
than the real world.
Yeah.
It's just a sort of approximation.
Yeah, it's a collapsing into an attempt
Yeah.
to order things, to control them and quote unquote understand. Whereas what's there is a psh. So that's the physics. How do you lasso psh? And it's really beautiful to see how we can um bloom different ways of ordering, but it's not the bloom.
Right. I really like that idea of our thoughts are just noise. That appeals to me. And I only wanted to stay in response to Deborah that I believe that whatever that is that we chant, where we talk about all sentient beings, I believe that we're moving towards not saying all sentient beings, but all beings, in relationship to, what are conscious beings or sentient beings, all beings. I just have seen or felt that I know I've been someplace in some retreat where we move towards saying all beings. That's all. And I'm afraid I have to go. And I didn't want to just leave abruptly because I love being with all of you and I don't want to be rude. So have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You too. And I love your Easter bonnet. So
Oh, yeah. Well, you see, Peter, I'm back to being you with no hair, almost no hair.
almost,
So
yeah.
my
Well, I've got my Easter bonnet on also.
and my head gets cold now. So because I did it for the
Exactly. That's why I
summer,
wear a hat.
but it's not summer here, so I'm a little ahead of the game. Yes, it's very attractive, I'm sure. And then my dogs are sort of driving me crazy going in and out here, so I keep getting up and down. But
Well, yeah, that's I want to go back to that. Is that we are we still it shows how little I'm paying attention because I learned the sentient beings version and so that sounds normal to me. Are we still saying sentient beings?
Creations.
Creations, good.
Creations are numberless.
Yeah, well, and it's also sometimes in one of the versions that is chanted at treetop, they say the many beings are numberless. Same kind of a thing, but not. But then what about non-beings? Well, seriously, I mean, if consciousness is a property of matter, and indigenous cultures believe this, then stones have consciousness, then rivers have consciousness, then it's not limited to biologic, whatever we want to call it, sort of biologically living beings, but all being.
That's the intent of all creations, right? That's how I understood it. Just like you were saying, includes everything.
Yeah, I think creations is inclusive. I'm pretty sure they were thinking about that idea that everything was entangled at the Big Bang, and okay. Has this made everybody sufficiently crazy this morning?
I just have to say very quickly, so we have this idea of the Big Bang, of course, right now, blah, blah, blah. But if you look back into the history of physics, there are times of revolution where there's a an experience of a radical change, a feeling of subversion or transformation of how we view uh, our physics. So there, I anticipate as someone who watches some of this a little bit and has had the queasy stomach of going from Newtonian physics to quantum mechanics, that of course there's going to be something else. Of course, that's how the human, if we're still around, if human beings are still around, we'll do another thing. There'll be another thing. And what we're floating now with quantum mechanics will be some other thing that is emerging as we speak that is already in somebody's imagination,
Or not.
but not mine. That's the name. I mean, it's kind of, God forbid, like talking about political systems. God forbid. Except in that case, it seems like patterns are more identifiably recurring. Whereas in the physics, it feels like an eruption of a whole new way. And then the people who mastered the previous way find it extremely unsettling and or absurd until it becomes the new norm.
It is said the way there's a revolution in science is when the older generation of
Dies.
scientists dies off.
But that's what happens. I mean,
Yeah.
as we know that we all know the stories of Einstein, which again can be, trivialized, but that, God doesn't roll dice. I mean, it's again, these are, anecdotal things, but anyway, just saying. So we don't have to be fixated on the Big Bang, and this idea of creations, of course, is inherently, you know, embracing a model of creation de novo or something from nothing or something like that could be looked at that way. But here is numberless.
And I think it's safe to say at any given moment, there is far more that we don't know than what we know. And it's only our hubris that allows us to believe that we've somehow got the whole picture put together, which I think is somewhat along the lines of what you were saying also, And so, again, the Dharma exists before words, before concepts, before understandings, and there's a form of certainty in that. And all this on an Easter morning. Okay. Anything else anyone would like to add before we say our vows?
I had one thought that I guess I could use some clarity on. Back to the relationship or the similarities between quantum physics and the Dharma, like the potentiality of, again, I don't know what I'm talking about, but like there seems to be potentiality in the quantum equation. To me, that relates to emptiness and the Dharma. Do you see any similarities between that? A kind of a field of potentiality?
All possibilities exist in the state of not knowing, right? Because we haven't defined any possibilities. We haven't narrowed it down. So
Yeah, I think that's what stuck out to me was that you referenced the state of not knowing with that potentiality. And I guess before hearing that, I was thinking more about like emptiness. Do you think not knowing and emptiness are the same thing or at least related?
all right, I think it's time to say our vows.
Can I say one quick thing that I can't
Yeah,
resist?
yeah, I didn't. No, I'm going to try to respond to that, but go ahead. You say what you're going to
I
say.
just have to say for two silly seconds, in the quantum field, the model, again, this is just a model, is creation and recreation. It's not an empty field. It's boom, 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 boom. It's so which kind of for me is like, wow. Just saying.
Yeah, but I don't think I mean, I'm probably just. We should probably move on because I don't think I clearly do not understand emptiness. But in my mind, emptiness is not just empty; it's a field of fertility and potentiality.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm inclined to agree with that. I mean, all possibilities exist in emptiness. We'll go into that identity of relative and absolute maybe next week, or at least start it, and that goes to a lot. You know, all dharmas are forms of emptiness. Not, so. But they're that what that whole identity, relative and absolute, is that they're inseparable. You can't say, there's emptiness and there's form. That's what it's all about. They're not. They're completely inseparable. Okay.
Got it.
If you're going to be
Yeah.
teaching next week, I'm going to bring my notepad to take some notes. No, these things defy our intellects. They don't make sense intellectually. And we think in terms of discrete states, right? Or we can even think in flux, but we can't, we can't think the absence of discrete states. Okay, that's enough of that. At least you're still smiling. That's a good sign.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Okay, everybody have a good day.